So, Rachel, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to help me out with this research. Let me ask you two main topics about your book or about the topic that I told you right now. So, the first one is, how do you think genome sequencing could be affected by artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that's a really big question. It's a good question. So I think, in a way, genome sequencing it's already led by AI on a basic level. So if you think back to the beginning when the first genome was being mapped out back in the early 1990s, a big problem they had was they did everything by hand to start with. So they didn't have all the automation programs that we do now. And it was very, very slow. So a big part of the project was actually to develop the technology alongside the science to help them speed up the process. So they actually built plenty of automation tools to do this for them. So if you think that there are 3.2 billion DNA strands in our body, doing that all by hand would be insane. Well, it would take forever, for one
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, they needed automation to help them. So in a way, machine learning has always been a part of genome sequencing. Obviously, there's a big step up now where we are talking about AI and machine learning. We think more about the ways that maybe the computer could take away some of these diagnosis tasks from clinicians, maybe. So, yeah. So you asked me, how could it be affected? How could it maybe
Yeah.
be improved? I think data management is a huge one. There is so much data being produced, every day by people working in genomics. I actually read a stat just this morning. So yeah, they predict that in the next decade, there's going to be between 2 and 40 exabytes of data generated just from genomics research.
Lovely. Wow.
Yeah, which is kind of unfathomable. I cannot imagine that much data. And so we need AI to organize that for us. And that is a storage problem as well, but I think that's maybe a side issue. The other
Yeah.
way that I think genome sequencing can be affected by AI on a practical level will be in healthcare. So they're already talking about how AI can help with faster diagnosis of diseases. There are some very clever ideas that I think are in their early stages, but very exciting. So, they're talking about how AI could map a person's face and look for signs of certain muscular diseases. And
Whoa.
yeah, that's the kind of the future, right? That's very sci-fi. Can you imagine scanning someone's face and seeing what disease they might have? It's a little bit scary,
This
but
is
yeah,
remember me like the Elysium film from Matt Damon that they have a machine that scan all the body and tell you that you have for example, breast cancer level 2. What? Like
yeah, this
that
is
kind
it.
of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much in films and things that already have these ideas, but actually they're kind of becoming reality. But yeah, in a more sort of short-term perspective, I think AI is already helping to help faster diagnosis in healthcare because it's doing what humans have already done for years, right? Clinicians and other specialists. They can take a patient's symptoms and their medical history, and they can work out, okay, the probability of you having this particular disease or this particular mutation in your genes might be this. And all the AI is doing is speeding up that process, which is good for everybody, right? Because it should make healthcare cheaper and faster, and it means that the doctors can focus on other things, more important
Yeah.
things than getting
It's
to that point.
like
Yeah.
to develop more information about the new diseases, or focus on studying more about the path, and not to do like the logic stuff, the logistic stuff of the medical, process.
Absolutely.
So thank you for the first answer. I think that is drawing us a little bit more of how it's going to be in the next decade, about genome sequencing and AI combination. And the second topic that I have is a more deeper one, a more concrete one. That is, you talk in your book about the ethics of these processes and their purposes. For example, the CRISP option to do genetic sequencing. Do you consider that if the most positive areas of these new technologies are systematized and automated, cancer prevention, elimination of probabilities of developing hereditary diseases, it will tend to normalize areas with more controversies, such as the choice of the A color of a newborn?
Yeah, that's a deep question.
I'm sorry for the long question, but I think it's interesting to know your.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that I think a lot of people are talking about right now. So yeah, to break it down, I guess. So CRISPR, yes, that's a really good example of how well AI is being used, can be used for genome sequencing as well, right? I like to when I think of CRISPR, it's a program basically. The way I think about it, which is probably way too basic for what scientists would describe it. It's like the Control F function on your keyboard. So you're trying to
Okay.
find a particular fault in the DNA, and you want to target that one section to maybe repair it, or replace it with some better coding. And how are you going to do that in a genome that has 3.2 billion strands? You can use the sort of shortcut key. So that's what it does. It finds this particular piece of coding. So that is already becoming really normalized. It's led to all sorts of gene therapies. A lot of them. So I think we have the science to do a lot of stuff, but the ethics hasn't really, or our sort of understanding of what we should and shouldn't do hasn't caught up. So scientists know how to fix and eradicate certain diseases, but they're not necessarily allowed to, certainly in a lot of countries, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't know the long-term impacts of this. So yeah, the science is there, and I think it's gonna just be a matter of time before most of these things are normalized. They are already using CRISPR and other programs like it they can cure sickle cell disease, for example. That's a really, really big topic in the US, where it's a huge problem for certain minority groups. But they have found a way to effectively treat and cure people from this horrible disease.
Oh.
And that's, in a really short amount of time, has been something where people have been sort of scared and said, oh, but I don't know if we should be using this technology, because what if it goes wrong? To thinking, okay, well, this is the best chance we have of treating people. And now, patients want it, healthcare professionals want it, the funding is there for it, it's happening. I think that'll happen. That'll spread across all sorts of other areas of research as well. So it'll become much more normal to use these sort of genomic tools to treat people. So that's one part. But then obviously the question leads to, okay, well, if we can do all this to fix the faults within us in our health, we can very easily fix aesthetic things that maybe we don't like about ourselves, or I think the thing that everyone's scared about is this idea of designer babies, isn't it? And if we can pick hair color and eye color and everything, and heights, even intelligence for our babies, I think a lot of people would. The question is, should we? And that's something that I think we haven't figured out yet. I mean, personally, I think having talked to people about this for my book, I think eventually it's going to happen, right? There's going to be, whether it's legal or not, people have the technology to do this, and they will choose the characteristics they want in their children. I don't think it's necessarily right. And luckily, in my opinion, we have a lot of laws and regulations at the moment that stop people from doing that. But yeah, the ethics and the laws around ethics definitely have to catch up.
It's like to have a candy machine to put money and you get the thing that you want, for example. No, and I think you have the technology to use it and do like a static thing of your baby, but it's not the best way, probably for now. We don't know in the future, like you told. But I understand that regulation and laws need to enter in that way to prevent us to make a catastrophe in the future, because as you told me, we don't know, and you put it in your book as well. We don't know the long-term impact about how this will affect. Like, you change the color of your eyes, but probably you have some disease later that we don't know because of that design change. No.
Yeah, so everything in our body, there's a theory. I mean, there's a lot of what they call nonsense coding. So we don't know why it's there. It's just kind of junk. But then there's also a lot of stuff which we just don't know the reason for it being there yet. So we could change the color of our eyes, and that could have a completely unintended consequence somewhere else in our body and lead to something negative. But even aside from that, I mean, as I'm sure you know, I think one of the major problems with this idea of selecting what traits you want in a human, it's going to lead to a real social divide and a real sort of lack of fairness, because as with anything, these kinds of technologies are going to be available to people with money in the first instance. So we don't want a system, this kind of dystopian sci-fi film system, where there's, you know, the beautiful rich people on one side of the world,
Yeah.
the more, well, quote unquote uglier people who haven't had the aesthetic help on the other side. That's the dystopian future.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.